You're never over a huge loss. Never. What you learn to do is to live and adjust to that loss. Can you live life again? Absolutely. Can you be happy again? Absolutely. But you're not over the loss. And I think we need to stop doing people an injustice by telling them to just get over it.
Hey, you are now tuned in to the It's the Human Experience podcast. Today, we have Denyse Turner on the podcast. Welcome, Denyse.
Welcome. Thank you.
Yes, so happy to have you guys. Today, we are going to be talking about all the things that people don't typically talk about when it comes to just really resolving some of the trauma and triggers that we experience in our life so that we could live our best life. We're really not in the business of pretending that life is just perfect and not going through any of the things. And so with that, we want to make sure that you are working through your trauma and triggers and becoming your best self. Before we get into the episode, I do want to make sure that if you're not already following the podcast, you scroll up to the top and hit that follow button. Make sure that you are subscribed, whether you're watching on YouTube or you are listening through one of your podcast streaming platforms. I want to make sure you don't miss any episodes because we're always dropping gems. But I'm not going to waste any time. We are going to jump right into the episode. Denyse, the first question that I want you to answer so that the listeners could get a better understanding of who you are, your journey, and where you're coming from is, who is Denyse?
That is funny, Hazel, because I think within the last 8 years, I started calling myself Denyse 2.0. And that's because I've been through so many different things and my whole perspectives have changed, so to speak. And so I consider myself to be an even better person than I was before. I'm upgraded. So I'm Denyse 2.0.
I love it.
Yeah. And when I say that, I lived a quote unquote charmed life, I will say. Being a pastor's wife, it's not everything that people think it is. There are challenges, there are missteps, there are tribulations, there are burdens. But overall, it was a really, really good life until I started falling when my husband died. And, if you want me to explain that now, I can, because it really speaks to how I'm Denyse 2.0, the things that I've gone through. So I lost him in 2015. From that point, I became homeless. I lost transportation. I lost income. I lost everything that meant anything to me in life. Everything that I had come to depend on, I lost it. Once I started regaining things, because I'm determined. When I started regaining things, then I moved to Las Vegas. I reconnected with a high school sweetheart. From that, I was involved in an abusive relationship for 14 months. And so it was physical, it was emotional, it was verbal, and it was something that I had never experienced in my life. And one of the other reasons why I say I'm 2.0 is because back in New Jersey, I used to work with young mothers who were at risk for child abuse and neglect and were going through abusive relationships. I would tell them, you don't have to accept abuse. Just walk away. I didn't know what I was saying because I was counseling and coaching on book knowledge and not experience. Being involved in an abusive relationship helped me to see that was not good advice because there's so many different things that you have to consider before you just walk away. It's not always feasible. It's not always possible. Even at my age now, they were young single mothers. I was 62 years old, 62 when I first got hit. And even at that age, it was not possible to just walk away. There were finances that I had to consider. There were the intermingling of resources that I had to consider. There was a house that we were in that I had to consider. So I had to change my perspective at that point and learn how I could get out safely and successfully. So I'm 2.0 right now.
I love it. I love you kind of talking through your why in terms of your Denyse 2.0, as well as just like the background in terms of the stages that we have to go through to get to the point where we are. Because many times people kind of talk about like who they are today, but they don't talk about the overcoming and what they had to get through to be the evolved version of themselves. It takes experience.
It does. It takes experience. It takes wisdom. You've got to employ the wisdom as well. And so I had to do those things. And I had to, like, why did you tell people to just walk away? Even with all of the resources that you have at your age, it's not possible.
Yeah.
So yeah, I had to walk through all of that and live through all of that, live the experience and understand how I could get to the other side.
Yeah, I think that that's really important that you talk about that because in really thinking through the layers of life, right? Many times we don't want to go through the process of the things that we're going through. And it's funny that in those moments, we are really being positioned to level up. Feel like we're being positioned to level up while we're going through it. But then when we get to the other side and we look back, we're like, oh my God, like I am so much stronger. I'm so much wiser to your point. I am so much better in terms of being efficient to do the work that I set out to do because of my experience.
But Hazel, when you're going through things, it's difficult to see it. And when you're right in the middle of a storm, it's very difficult to see that. And I was speaking with a client this morning, and one of the things that he was saying was, I'm tired. I don't want to do this. I really want to commit suicide because I'm tired of this. I don't want to be here. And my thing is, I have to counsel a certain way because I am Denyse. You know, this is what I do. This is how I do it. I'm trying to provide the hope. And at that point, he said, I don't even care where I go. I don't care. If I commit suicide, if I go to hell, it's okay because I'm just tired. And so sometimes people just don't feel, you know, that situation. They don't have the capacity to walk through the situation and understand that things do get better.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the more we talk about things like this, though, is the more people can see that it does get better. And so many times I feel like the way that we're raised is to keep everything private, to keep everything to ourselves. Like, don't share that. Oh my God, don't share your dirty laundry. But the reality is we all have dirty laundry. And if you're like me, I don't even like folding clothes. So we talk about those dirty laundry and going through it, right? Like with that, we don't share all of our stuff. But there's so many people who suffer as a result of us keeping quiet. And so it's so important to realize like, you're no anomaly. Like there's nothing special about what you're going through in terms of, yes, it's hard, but other people are experiencing hard too. And the more that you get over yourself and allow other people to get in and realize like, wow, it looks real glitzy and glamorous on the outside, but you're going through some stuff too. They then realize like, wait, maybe I can hold on. Maybe I can keep going. Maybe I can get to the other side too. But if we never talk, they just feel like, why am I going through this? Like, why is the devil after me? Like, what is it about me that makes me so bad? I thought I was a good person.
The interesting thing, about what you're saying, because, and again, 2.0, being the pastor's wife, people don't expect you to go through certain things. They wear masks. And it wasn't until I lost my husband that I started doing a lot of research, talking to a lot of pastors' wives, and learning that they are going through abuse as well, but they don't share it. Why am I going to share? I'm up here. I don't want people to understand what I'm going through because I'm the role model. I'm supposed to be quote unquote perfect. I'm not going to share that. And not just for me, but I don't want to damage the church or my husband. The thing with that, though, is who is really hurting? Who's hurting the most? This person is suffering in silence. And when you suffer in silence, that trauma will embed itself in your life. So at that point, I had to remove my mask, because God said, how can you really help somebody if you're going to hold on to your experiences? You can't. You have to be open, honest, transparent, and share with people what you've been through to give them the hope that they need. I had to remove the mask.
Yeah. And that relatability is everything. I definitely wanted to expand on your Denyse 2.0. If you could describe yourself in 3 words, what would those 3 words be?
I think, and I said a little while ago, determined. And I was determined. I am determined because I guess I lived a good life. I'm determined to get back to that. It may not look like it did before, but it's going to be better. So I'm determined to do what I have to do to get back to that point. I'm resilient because everything that I have gone through, I had to think about it. I had to process it and figure out, how do I get through this so that I can now live a successful life and help somebody else in the process? So I have to be, and I didn't understand then I was being resilient. But when I think about it, that's what it is. So I am resilient. And then I think that I've always been an empath. Even in high school, it was always interesting to me to look at people, see how they behave, to see their emotional states. And so when I got to college, I majored in psychology. And that increased my ability to be an empath. So I was always a person thinking about other people. I don't even know how that happened. I don't know. Could have been something from childhood. But I was always thinking about other people and hoping that they're not suffering, so to speak. And so majoring in psychology in college, I think increased that ability to be an empath and to care and be concerned about other people's mental and emotional states. So I would say, again, determined, resilient, and an empath. Those 3 words sort of encapsulates Denyse 2.0. Right. 2.0. Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah. I really want to kind of rewind, but at the same time forward and kind of take us into the conversation. When I was looking at the statistics around trauma in terms of worldwide spread trauma, statistically, the World Health Organization shared that 70% of people identified and shared that they'd experienced some level of trauma. And so we talked about the veils. We talked about people kind of keeping things to ourselves. And so in knowing that, we know that that number is a lot higher than 70%. But for us to even be there as a nation and for it to be an issue, when we think about trauma, we're talking about any kind of trauma as it relates to violence, accidents, just neglect, any kind of childhood experiences, to your point, just any kind of medical trauma. There's just so many ways for us to experience trauma, which is why that number is so high. But I wanted to allow you to kind of share with the listeners how they can identify, like, if they're experiencing some level of trauma or triggers around any trauma that they've already experienced.
Well, let's define what trauma really is, because a lot of times, and I think the word trauma has become a buzzword these days. I never really heard about trauma 20 or 25 years ago. However, people were going through different issues, but the word itself, I think people oftentimes misuse it. So let's define what trauma actually is. It's actually an emotional response to a horrifying, stressful, or dangerous event, relationship, or a circumstance that threatens to harm a person's health and safety. And I will say that 70% number that you quote has to be higher, because most people will experience at least one form of trauma in their lifetime. Now, whether it's an acute trauma, a single event like a car accident or sexual assault, or whether it's complex trauma, which is prolonged and repeated response to these events like child abuse and neglect, domestic violence, or civil unrest. It could be a secondary or vicarious trauma in which we witness somebody else's responses to trauma. And that happened a lot for 9/11. A lot of us were not there in New York City for 9/11, but understanding what people were going through, that's a secondary or vicarious trauma. And then we have our first responders, healthcare providers, therapists who hear the stories, who see the stories, and they have to relive those traumas. And then there's generational traumas. We don't even think about that a lot of times, but generational traumas are passed down from one generation to the next, and especially if it's experienced by a collective group, like those of us who are African American have been through slavery, or those who are Jewish have been through the Holocaust, things. And those are traumas that are passed down through generations. And we have to be able to process the traumas that we experience. And there can be a short-term processing. The days and the weeks following a trauma, we sort of return to some sense of normalcy or routine. We may experience some stress or flashbacks, but we are basically recovering in a healthy manner. But when you have to go through a long-term recovery, that makes a difference, because now we are reliving endlessly the traumas that we've been through. We're feeling them. We are experiencing what it felt like to go through those traumas. And I think that's where the triggers come in, because it's a reminder of the traumatic things that we've been through, whether it's a sound, a sight, smell, or even a day or time of season can be a trigger for a lot of people. For people who have had a huge loss in their lives, the holiday times are a trigger. My husband died a few days before Thanksgiving. Thanksgiving was his favorite holiday. And so I had to go through the Thanksgiving holiday with all of that. He died just before Thanksgiving, but I couldn't have the service until after Thanksgiving. So I had to go through that whole holiday. That's a trigger. That's definitely a trigger. And I'll talk more about how I've been able to get through it. But for people who have PTSD, it could be anything that will trigger them, and that trigger will activate or worsen the symptoms that they experience. So even if people who experience OCD, there could be an extreme fear just by the sight of a dirty doorknob, something we don't even think about or consider, but it's a trigger for them. Or a person who is recovering from alcohol abuse. If they just smell the alcohol, that could be a trigger. So there are things that we don't even consider that other people go through. Now, I also have to tell you, though, what trauma is not. And a lot of times we use what we have been through as an excuse or get out of jail free card to cause emotional or physical pain to somebody else. That's what I experienced in that abusive relationship, because this person had gone through trauma in his life. He had been abandoned as a teenager. He experienced PTSD. And now what you're doing is you're transferring that to other people. You're causing physical, emotional pain to somebody else. Your pain, your trauma, your experiences are never an excuse to hurt somebody else.
Yeah. I want to make sure that we really uncover exactly what you just said, because I feel that what happens is not I feel, it's what happens. People don't spend enough time to talk about what they're going through, whether they're talking to someone they feel safe with or seeking professional help or journaling or taking the time to really reflect on what their traumas are and what they've experienced. And then they transfer that trauma to you because hurt people hurt people. And when we don't heal, then we get ourselves into situations where we see that it's a cycle, that we keep damaging people and hurting ourselves in relationships. And then we say, oh, we're not good enough to be loved, or no one likes me, or what is it wrong with me? But we really need to take the time to figure out who we are as people. And that's why I always start with, who are you? Because when we identify, like really think about who we are as people, then we can really start to get a better sense of removing the veil and figuring out who we are. And so that's just the basic sense of who are you? And then from there is, what have you gone through in life? And sitting with that and then trying to work on healing through that, so that there isn't so much of a transfer between, okay, I'm over here hurt about XYZ, and now I'm going to bring you down too. Like, no, don't do that. Not only is it not good for the next person, it's not good for you. You deserve to live a fulfilling life. You shouldn't be walking around so damaged to where you're damaging other people, sometimes unintentionally, because of how hurt you are.
Many times unintentionally. And I will say, though, that if a person develops a personality disorder as a result or subsequent to a trauma, I think many times it is intentional. And I say that because of a person with narcissistic personality disorder. Another term that we use a lot of times, inappropriately, incorrectly. So this person that I dealt with was doubly diagnosed. So I can actually say that that exists. Did he intentionally hurt? Yes, he does. But for the most part, most people do not intentionally hurt. And one of the things that God is leading me to do is look at a church situation, look at a corporate situation. There are people, and like we said, most people have experienced some trauma. There are people that we sit beside, work beside every day that are experiencing something. They're transferring that to us. because they don't know how not to. And now we are experiencing everything that they're feeling. That is unintentional, but something has to be done. And so I've started to create trauma-informed ministries for churches and trauma-informed projects in the corporate setting, to train people how to have the compassion for other people. You don't know everything that somebody is going through or has been going through. You don't know. But why don't we err on the side of caution and exhibit some compassion and care and concern for a person who may be exhibiting some negative behavior patterns? Why not? What's the problem? Can't we do that?
I definitely want to touch there because it's funny. I have a conference coming up in March of next year. It's called Workplace Therapy. And I think something that you touch on really is just as you're kind of going into the workplace from a corporate standpoint, sometimes your boss is experiencing all sorts of trauma. They have no control at home. And so when they come into the workplace, they take their titles a little too seriously because they're not happy. And so they don't know how to build a good team. They don't know how to have empathy and compassionate for their other employees and their other colleagues because of everything that they're going through. And then what you see them show up as is not 2.0. It is beyond half of one, let alone 2.0. And then we wonder, like, how much trauma is going on in the workplace because everyone's walking around unhealed. Not everyone. We're all healing every day. So I'm going to say everyone because what we healed from yesterday, child, we're going to have to heal from today's work tomorrow.
Or something different.
Yes, exactly. So we have unhealed people just walking around in the workplace, in church, everywhere we go. And sometimes we mean each other well, but that environment is so unhealthy. And the reason why I wanted to sit in this, Denyse, is because in my years of being a career coach, in my years of working in healthcare management, I had never experienced trauma in the workplace. And then all of a sudden I experienced it. And I'm like, wait, hold on. Not only are you Hazel 2.0 and you've never gone through this and you have boundaries in your life, but you would never accept for your husband to put his hands on you or to talk to you some kind of way. But the people that you're engaging with in the workplace is making you feel small and you know who you are. Right. And so I started to realize like there's a whole problem here and other people are experiencing this in the workplace, even when they're not experiencing it in their whole everyday life that they've created a nice capsule for to make sure that they can shine. And so I love the work that you're doing because it's important.
And I think it's necessary. We are not able to interact with each other if we don't have some sort of healing. Because as we said, a lot of times it's unintentional. Your boss might, not have control at home, but he has control on that job. And so he doesn't see that as bad because now you're treating someone else in a way that is unhealthy. You don't see that as a problem. So I think that it's important that, we raise our voice to these kinds of things and see what we can do. Those of us who have the care, concern, and the mental health or health experience to help people through this, because if not, we're just going to be a messed up world and we're heading that way. So we really want to take the time to help somebody else. That's a challenge for you. Well, how can you impact your boss? Because there are other things to consider. Well, you got to pay me. I need my money. How can I tell him, sir, you are not doing the right thing? And that's something that has to be considered and, something that we have to think about as well.
Yeah. No, I love that. It's very important to really sit down and figure out like your locus of control. Is it even worth it to have that conversation? Is this a place where I see myself if we're talking about the workplace? And if so, then I need to figure out how to go about having this conversation in a
Right.
way that it'll be received and they'll know that I'm coming from a good place. I definitely wanted to shift gears and really talk through trying to figure out in all of the things that you shared that you experienced. So kind of overcoming the passing of your husband. I know it's not overcoming because in losing my mom, I get it. It's smells, it's dates, it's I just want my mom today. It's anything, right? And then
Absolutely.
kind of going through homelessness and going through the domestic violence situation and then trying to come out of that and rebuild Denyse. Like, what would you say were some myths along the journey as you reflect and look back that you're like, this was not right? Why did they tell me this?
Well, and I would say for me, from an environment that was steeped in religion, being a pastor's wife, being the role model, one of the things that the church usually says, if you have an issue, just pray about it. I think that that is sort of misleading. It's a myth that you should only just pray about something. Now, I dare not discount or not honor the value of prayer, but God also gives us tools and people who are equipped to provide exactly what we need to overcome along with the prayer. Addressing mental illness, it might be uncomfortable, but it's hugely important that we address those issues and that can lead to those positive outcomes that we need. So I just think it's a myth that we just say, well, just pray about it or forget about it. What that does is the body always represses something that's painful anyway, but we suppress what we feel because we don't want to offend somebody else who says, just get over it. Just pray about it. And that helps no one really, because now I'm suppressing the emotions because you said, just pray about it. I'm not taking advantage of people who can really help me through this. And so eventually when you suppress those emotions, you're bottling them up. They got to have somewhere to go, right? Eventually they will come out. So I think that that's one of the myths that, I've learned, that we can't just keep discounting the value that people need to get the help. We can't just tell them, just pray about it or just forget it. Just get over it. It doesn't help. When we're talking about grief and loss, a lot of times, and like you said yourself, there are triggers in the loss of your mother. A lot of times we expect people to heal or to come out, journey through something on our timetable. That's absolutely inappropriate because everybody is on their own journey of loss. Everybody will go through as they're allowed to go through. And even if we think that they should be over it by now, we can't say, get over it. You should be better by now. Okay, so my husband has been gone. Actually, it'll be 8 years in 2 days. In 2 days, it will be 8 years. And so I'm supposed to be over it. Well, what I am, you're never over a huge loss. Never. What you learn to do is to live and adjust to that loss. Can you live life again? Absolutely. Can you be happy again? Absolutely. But you're not over the loss. And I think we need to stop doing people an injustice by telling them to just get over it. Well, you should be fine by now.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm fine. I'm good. You know, I'm happy. I'm doing what I have to do in life. But it's an adjustment. It's a
Absolutely.
huge adjustment.
One thing that I realize kind of in talking through grief is I've had to express to people that on the flip end of grief is understanding that there's different levels of love.
Yeah.
And so sometimes people look and will say, you know, maybe, and not necessarily to me. And unfortunately, I guess I'm at that age where a lot of people are losing their moms and their parents right now. And so you tend to realize like some people respond differently. And I've just been able to realize that it's really the level of love you have for someone in terms of how much that loss affects you and how much something impacts you. And
Mhm.
so you really can't judge that because you're not in that relationship to know like the level of love that that person has for that person. And you talked about being an empath too, when you're naturally the kind of person who's caring and really cares about strangers, let alone your husband or your mom, it's going to be a different level of grief and getting through that.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I tend not to, I don't dwell on the loss. Like I said, in 2 days, it'll be 8 years. I don't dwell on the loss. However, I have memories. I have emotions and feelings regarding the loss. My focus is on now moving forward, coming out of that loss, letting people know I'm adjusting. I mean, I have a friend who lost her husband 20 years ago. It's still an adjustment. Like you said, depends on the level of love that you had for that person.
Yeah, no, absolutely. As we think about like you evolving into Denyse 2.0, we're going to stay on that, right? I wanted to see if you look back and had to talk to your younger self, what would you say to your younger self, your 20-year-old version of Denyse?
Oh, Hazel. Ooh, if I had to talk to my younger self, um, and that's a question that I never even thought about, even going back to a younger Denyse. But if I have to look back over what I've been through, and I think the advice that I would give my younger self is, baby girl, you're going to go through some very rough patches in your life's journey. You might not think it because you've had a really good childhood. You might not think that you're going to go through rough patches, but you will. But what I would tell you is don't dwell on each trial or each instance because they do come and go. And this is what prevents us from moving forward successfully because circumstances will always change, but God don't change. And because you are the person that you are in your heart right now, and I'm talking as a teenager, you've shown your ability to love and help difficult people. And we can't just look for perfect people to help. Do they really need the help? We need to help the difficult people. But understand that as you help somebody else, God is going to heal the hole in your soul. And I think that that is the advice that I would give myself because this is what I've learned in this season of 2.0.
Yes, I love that. I love that. That evolution of knowing that it's not going to be perfect, but you're going to get through it. I think
Absolutely.
it's so important
Hmm.
that you shared that message, not only to your younger self, but also to our listeners, because to your point, not only in the season that we're in, but just in life, like there are going to be modes and areas of your life that you're like, ugh, why me? How am I to your point? You might have had a good childhood. It wasn't always dysfunction and things. So you're like, what is this? They did not prepare me for days like this.
That's
But
right.
you're going to get through it. Just hold on to that resilience, be determined, right? And know that as an empath, and even if you're not an empath, just know that we're all here for each other, living through the human experience. Denyse, where can
Absolutely.
the listeners find you online?
Ooh, they can find me almost any place. So I do have a business page, and I'll be rebranding that soon. First Lady Ministries on Facebook. I'm evolving with that as well. So I will, let people know when that is changing. But First Lady Ministries on Facebook. I Lady Dr. Denyse on Instagram, Lady Dr. Denyse, and that's pretty much what it is everywhere. So on Instagram, LinkedIn, TikTok,
Okay.
I do a lot of little inspirational messages on TikTok, and I'll usually share them over to LinkedIn and Instagram and Facebook. So just about any place that you can, and there's some other places like Threads and, those other little places, but every place that you can think of is either First Lady Ministries or Lady Dr. Denyse. You can find me. Put in Denyse H. Turner. You can
Yes.
find me.
Nice. You guys make sure you go out and follow Denyse and support her on her journey as she makes impact across organizations and through ministries to help us uncover that trauma, identify those triggers, and make sure that we continue to heal and grow into our best self, right? Listen, if you're not already following the podcast, please make sure that you go ahead and you follow us, subscribe, leave a comment. We want to know your greatest takeaways from this episode. We want to know what triggers and traumas you've been able to identify and what you're working towards healing from, because we want to be in a world to where we are very clear about who we are and whose we are and where we're headed. And we want to make sure this conversation was so impactful that you're really removing the veil yourself and starting to work on becoming a more healthy, healed version of you. Thanks so much for tuning into the Human Experience podcast. I hope this episode was a value add. I'll see you on the next episode.